are on the record today with two guests this time, State Senator Jill Carter, State Representative Lane Roberts, both from Missouri. And we're really delving into one topic in particular. First of all, thank you both for going on the record with us this morning. I know it's been a busy session in Jefferson City, but one item that everybody has been looking at, HJR 173. Lane, I want to start with you since it started in the House. What exactly is HJR 173?
It is a request to the voters to ask them whether or not they want to eliminate the income tax. And it's based on the idea of revenue neutrality, in that first and foremost there has to be economic growth and then a commensurate reduction in the income tax. But the HJR basically allows us to place it before the voters. So the next step, the important step, is do the voters want this to happen or not?
Now, you said something right there, revenue neutral. Senator Carter, you and I were talking about this, and Lane, right before the episode started. When we say revenue neutral, what exactly do we mean?
That means if there's any economic growth, there is an automatic trigger to decrease the income tax. So they're linked. You can't have one without the other. So if, like I said, increase in revenue means a decrease in income tax.
So when this goes on the ballot before voters, if they say yes, that doesn't mean that starting the very next day, my income tax goes away.
So what they passed initially out of the House was a 3-year moratorium, essentially, or a plan to implement what it would be ultimately a package that would come before the legislative body to vote on how to implement that. What we passed in the House was a 5-year plan. So that would be something that would be developed. There's kind of a framework put in the HJR, but it would come back to the legislature to kind of flesh out some of those details on what this looks like ultimately.
Yeah, and
that's predicated on the voters agreeing to it.
Agreed.
I think the piece that everybody seems to miss is that the legislature is not imposing anything. We're quite literally asking the voters, do you want this or not? What came out of the House went to the Senate. As much as I hate to admit it, the Senate sent it back in a little better package. And I think what we have right now tries to account as much as possible for any unintended consequences to make sure this truly does remain revenue neutral if it gets passed.
There were some really great conversations that happened in my office. I know that there are a lot of our local entities, governing bodies were concerned about how this might impact local government. And we had some of our mayors and city council members on phone calls with those who are trying to get this passed, be able to have conversations at the local level on how this would impact them. And honestly, I think it did end up being better coming from the Senate. And I would like to think it's partly because of the feedback and communication we had at the local level.
you're dealing with a major source of revenue for the state. I mean, taxes are how the state gets their funds. Having those conversations, taking that approach to it, how critical is it when you're dealing with that big of a pool of money?
Well, you're talking about a huge transition from what we know in Missouri. We were talking about this earlier. 1930s was the last time we looked at something like this, and so it's been a long time since we've taken on this kind of big transition. And to make sure that our local entities, governing entities, are comfortable and they actually know what the plan is and the goals and objectives, and they have some feedback and say in how this is implemented, I think is critical.
This is truly transformational. I mean, this is going to change fundamentally how the state goes about providing revenues and governing itself. It's important to understand that in this package, very specifically, we've protected school districts. This will not affect the school districts. And in fact, the legislation specifically says that school districts are exempt.
And when you guys are crafting this legislation, I know this was a big priority of Governor Kehoe. He mentioned it in his State of the State address. When that's delivered to you, I'm sure you guys had some heads up for it. Take me back to those conversations. How many of those were there? What did they look like when you're trying to craft this and make sure we're not negatively impacting, whether it's the school districts, the cities, the counties?
Well, this didn't start out spontaneously. The governor told us way back before he was ever inaugurated that he wanted to eliminate the income tax. He had done quite a bit of work and actually has a background in private industry, and so he understood the impact of income tax. So we knew from the very beginning. I think he came in with at least the framework for a plan. He had direct contact He stopped. I know he was in our caucus a couple of different times and spoke to us very directly, took questions, responded to questions. So we had a pretty fair idea of what was coming before it ever proposed.
Now, when I ask you guys, let's look at both sides of the issue. On the pro side, there have been a lot of folks saying this could be big for business in Missouri. This could be big for attracting folks to Missouri. We were talking about that beforehand. There were people that actually said, "Hey, I would look at Missouri for relocating my business." They said that in testimony in both the House and the Senate, did they
Well,
not?
you're looking at states like Texas and Florida that we're competing with, and other states are starting to look at the possibility of doing this in their states. So I think from the perspective of the governor, he's trying to be ahead and make sure that we're at the tip of the spear and not trailing behind when other states are looking at the possibility of doing this themselves.
Yeah, there's some fairly clear data that would indicate that states that don't have income taxes clearly outpace those that do, and there are no exceptions. There are no states with income tax that are outpacing the non-income tax. And as I was telling you, I actually come from a pair of states where I worked in both Oregon and Washington. One has a sales tax, one has an income tax. The one with the sales tax far outpaces the other. And in fact, we had somebody on the floor argue that, well, the reason that Washington State outpaces Oregon is because they've got Microsoft. And my question is, why do you think Microsoft is in Washington? They will tell you very clearly, it's the income tax. It places a burden on both the employer and the employees that make it difficult.
And I'm not trying to point fingers or name names. There was another state in the Midwest within recent years that eliminated income tax. And Lane, I believe you and I had a conversation at one point that the state of Missouri wasn't going to take that approach. This was going to be a more measured approach. Is that why there is that phase? There has to be these benchmarks that are hit?
Triggers.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to think as a legislature, both as in the House and the Senate, we're smart enough to benefit by other people's experience. Another state close by did it. We're doing it with a plan.
Now let's switch to the other side. On the other hand, there are folks that say this is going to end up costing more because maybe I was paying $500 in income tax before. Now I could be paying $1,000 in sales tax. But it sounds like from talking with you all that it still gives the voter a little bit more agency, is what you believe.
Especially at the local level. Again, you're looking at those local entities and you're trying to encourage them to choose for themselves. There are several options. There's a mandatory reduction when they see also an increase in the sales tax, for them to have the option of going back and saying, well, then we're going to reduce property tax at the same equivalent level. So that's something that I think everybody would be championing, because it is, again, we've talked about this, you never own your home because if you don't pay your property tax, you lose your home. Well, if you're able to use that consumption tax where you have a choice of going and purchasing something to offset property taxes at the local level, but still be able to have your infrastructure, your ambulance districts, things like that, be funded through that, then that's a win, I think, all around for everyone.
And that issue about the consumption tax is a very important aspect. When we talk about what might be taxed, we're looking at the option of taxing services, which we currently don't do. That has the effect of mitigating the effect on taxes on goods. And all of those taxes are things you get to choose. Right now, the income tax, you have no choice. The government simply takes it away from you. And as Jill said, if you don't pay it, you can lose your home. Here, you get the opportunity to decide, do I want to purchase that good or services? Do I want to pay that tax? Does it make it easier? Not necessarily, but at least it's discretionary instead of compulsive.
One of the things that struck me through the process of this, and I may be off base, and if I am, please tell me, when Joplin was looking at Proposition Police and Fire, one of the things that was said was, look at the number of people that come from out of state to Joplin. They'll be helping us pay for our police and fire. We have I-44, we have I-49, we have St. Louis, we have Kansas City, we have Branson. In a sense, would this be other folks helping us fund the state if we moved into this sales tax formula?
And you saw that. I think Lane can speak to that very well with his experience.
I see he's smiling. I think you were waiting on that question.
When I think about the two states that I was referring to, well, let's just be candid, Oregon and Washington. Oregon has no sales tax. They're income tax based. Both Oregon and Washington are tourist meccas, and millions of people a year go to those states. But in Oregon, they pay for none of the services. there's no sales tax. You go to Washington, people who use the services provided by states and local government in Washington help pay for it. We see about 40 million visitors a year in Missouri, but they're not contributing as they could to our economic health.
Now, I want to ask you both. This is going to be on the ballot. It'll be up to the governor. Right now, it looks like November. He could move it to August. If there's something that the voters need to know before they go to the ballot box and they say yay or nay to this proposal, what is that?
That there's a constitutional check that will be on the ballot initiative that basically says that once this passes, there can not be an increase in income tax afterwards. So that'll be constitutional, that once this is eliminated with those triggers in growth, that the legislative body can't come back and impose an income tax. So that's one caveat that I think is helpful to alleviate a little bit of the concerns. So hopefully we don't have later down, in the future, somebody coming and saying, well, here's an opportunity for us to implement an income tax again where we've transitioned. Right. So that's something that brings a little bit of peace of mind. Another peace of mind is it doesn't touch your local schools. The third thing is it also helps your counties be able to make a decision on what they're going to do with that influx or that increase in sales tax. Do we want to start to scale down our property tax, but yet not run the risk? These are heavy conversations we've been having for the last couple of years because of the state tax commission. An unelected bureaucratic board, especially, you saw it in Southwest Missouri where there was massive pushback about what the state tax commission was imposing on our local assessors. That increase in sales tax increase in real estate tax wasn't because our local assessor wanted that. It was being imposed by an unelected bureaucratic board that was kind of threatening local money. So to be able to have that conversation at a local level about what we do with property tax, I think is a huge win.
Mm-hmm. And I know that there are those who are concerned. There are a fairly small group that theoretically could be adversely impacted. Some folks who don't currently pay income tax. We're well aware of that. And when we start fleshing this out, we're going to try to do what we can to mitigate that. There is a group that, and again, this is theoretical, could be adversely impacted. We are aware of it and we're trying to be sensitive to that. It's not like we just don't care.
And to piggyback off that, the conversations are already starting to happen about, they're in the Senate. In fact, we've had this conversation for a couple of years. How do we eliminate sales tax on food? That's something that everyone needs. But right now with the budget, there's no way for us to do that. So if there was if we were to pass this, there might be the possibility where we have that increase in sales tax. People who are traveling through the state are also contributing to that, where we might be able to say, listen, we're in a place where we can actually eliminate the food tax, sales tax on food.
That's actually an excellent point. The state of Washington, in fact, did eliminate the income tax on
the sales tax?
The sales tax on necessary foods. I mean, they still taxed liquor and candy and that kind of thing, but way back even in the 70s, they eliminated the tax on food. So it's not something that can't happen. And in fact, if this does what we think it's going to do, I would think there's even a probability that could occur in the future.
One of the things that I've read, don't ask me which op-ed it was, but there was an op-ed penned about this, and one of the folks said that the legislature, their words were, wisely left themselves room to work on this as the situation develops. You're not locked into, it sounds like, you're not on rails with it if you get a couple of years down the road and you say, we need to address this, there's an opportunity there to do so.
Agree. I mean, I think that's the smart way to do it. As you're trying to transition, you're going to want that flexibility. And we see that in a lot of sectors right now where we're trying to deal with what the federal government is doing. How do we start to scale back or scale up or look at our own budgets? So there's a lot of moving parts. I think to a certain degree, a lot of people are feeling a little bit of whiplash. I mean, we're looking at a rewrite of the foundation formula. We're looking at budget cuts. We're looking at imposing or eliminating the income tax, how that transitions. So there's a lot of moving parts and pieces. So the goal, in my opinion, is to make sure that we're intentional about communicating educating our constituents on what this looks like as the process moves forward. But to Lane's point, the first question is, should the legislature look at the possibility of eliminating the income tax, and what does that look like?
Yeah. And that's a decision the voters get to make. They will tell us whether or not they want us to do this.
Yeah, and I know we've kind of danced around it, but I'm just going to directly ask you, how important is it in both of your minds that it not be the legislature, it not be the governor, it be the folks that are paying it that get to weigh in on it?
Oh, I think that's representative government, you know, for them to be able to say constitutionally, is this something that we should be looking at? And I can't imagine doing it any other way.
I think that's actually well put. We're supposed to represent what we're told the people want. And in this case, so much of what we do with income tax is imposed, whereas here, they're going to tell us, do you want to do this or not? And then we will respond accordingly.
So we're kind of getting towards the end of our conversation, but I want to go back and hit on a couple of points. One of them is, again, if voters say no, things stay the way they are.
Yep.
It's business as usual. If voters say yes, you're not going to do that on Tuesday and wake up on Wednesday and your income tax is gone. I think that's a key thing to stress here.
Yeah, there's a 5-year plan, essentially. We have 5 years to have the legislature look at how we do this and trying to be intentional and give us, like I said, that on-ramp was essentially 3 years when it came out of the House. We extended that 2 more years in the Senate. That gives us plenty of time to communicate back to our constituents about what it is that we're doing and how we're implementing it.
And that is, I think, a critical point. During that 5-year window, not only are we going to try to flesh this out, it also gives us an opportunity to talk to the very people who said, we want you to do this, to be able to ask them, how do you want us to do it? As we craft ideas, we go to them and ask them, does this work for you? Because the last thing we want to do is wind up with something that the people don't want. It's sort of counterproductive if we approach it that way.
And I would imagine in my office, the same conversations will be happening if this passes that happened prior to that. Look, this is going to impact my local government, my mayors, our schools, fires, etc. So they had questions. Do you have time to take their questions and answer them? And I think that's how it's supposed to be. And so there's the opportunity for people to weigh in, I think is critical.
And we're talking about a fundamental shift in the way that we fund our state government. And it sounds like what both of you guys are saying is this gives us an opportunity to make sure that it's being done right in your minds.
Very intentionally.
And I appreciate the fact that you've had us here today. My biggest concern is that because ballot language tends to be fairly limited, that people are voting on something they don't understand, the more opportunity we have to communicate with people directly or to do some mass communication like this, the better. I think this is such a big transition for our state. People will need to be informed before they go to the polls.
And like I said, I think we're in the middle of a lot of push-pull. We're in the middle of a lot of transition. So being very intentional about our communication and what our intentions are, I think are critical.
Yeah, we're kind of getting into well, I think we're past the home stretch part of the session. The clock's about to strike midnight. How big of a win was this? I know this was a priority for Governor Kehoe when this crossed the finish line. Is this the biggest ticket item of the session, or is it just one of the bigger ones? Or is that a really big question?
Is it a trick question? I don't see it as a trick question. I think it is one of the more critical questions. I mean, it'll come before the vote of the people. I think that's good for them to be able to weigh in on. But I think I've had a fabulous session. We got grooming and extortion. Basically that's a crime now. That's something that came from our community. We've got VOCA language protections for victims of crime. We got truth in sentencing passed. I mean, we've done a lot of really good things this legislative session, and I've gotten most of my priorities done. I think I won't speak for him, but Lane's been had a great year too, I think.
I've probably the best, most productive year that I've had. There is, in both chambers, there is a different leadership philosophy. It's been very collegial. I wouldn't say that there hasn't been disagreements, but it's more collegial, and everybody's focused on being productive. We haven't had any of the mean-spiritedness that maybe existed before.
I'll let you fill in those blanks.
Yeah, this, as somebody who does follow the session and tries to stay up to date, that's something that's kind of struck me is there hasn't been, there's certainly been debate. There have been tense moments, I would say, but there hasn't been a feeling of, I think hostility is probably too strong of a word for it.
I'm not sure it is too strong. There was a time in the past when hostility would probably be an accurate description.
You know, and I know this is a little off topic, but I welcome more debate and dialogue. I mean, we seem to be apprehensive about having discussions. You know, when people are upset or frustrated, that's when you need to be having more discussions. People deserve to be heard. They want to understand what's going on. So that isn't the time for us as legislators to step back. That's the time to press in and say, okay, just like this opportunity to say, this is the intention, this is how we're planning on doing it. Look, weigh in on this. I think the more intentional we are about those conversations, the more people feel heard and the better we are able to represent them. So there should be not hesitation. I've heard that for many years. Well, a lot of debate and dialogue, especially in the Senate when every senator has equal power. It is kind of like the Wild West. But as I was taught and told by a former senator from this area, the House creates bills and the Senate creates laws. And it is through that dialogue and debate that you build consensus. So we shouldn't shy away from that dialogue.
I couldn't have put that any better.
But I think something that all three of us and probably the entirety of most of the legislative body would agree on. There's a difference between healthy debate and sometimes the open hostility you'll see in some places. My grandpa used to say, two reasonably intelligent people can disagree and it's okay. You can disagree on a subject, but I was always raised to believe that that's supposed to be the idea of the legislature is you have disparate groups that come together, they find a middle ground, and they move forward with it. And I think that's what we saw this year.
Well, in that shift of culture and leadership, I will say, just speak for the Senate, the last 2 years have been transformative as far as leadership. Leadership matters. Who you elect matters. We haven't had that leadership in the Senate prior to my first 2 years was not like my last 2 years. And so being able to participate in those more intentional discussions has been transformative. Session in the Senate did start off a little rocky because of how session ended last year. But again, I think it was an asset because it gave us, while we were very busy still with the committee hearings and trying to move legislation, it gave us intentional time on the back end to have some of these conversations so that when we went to the floor, we really had built consensus. And so I think it's honestly, the possibility of it being a model of slowing down the beginning of session instead of being the expectation of hitting the ground running, so to speak, really gave us breathing room in the Senate I think we've passed more House bills. I think we've passed only 3 Senate bills in the House.
There's no question. It has been a productive session. I've had more luck this year than ever. Well, not luck. You have to work. You don't pass bills if you don't work. But sometimes you just work and work and work and the end result is zip. This year we have actually had good production, bills with substance that really do affect the public, make their lives better. And in answer to the question you initially asked, the income tax issue probably in the long term will turn out to be the most transformative because it has such long-term effects on the quality of our life. But I agree with the senator. Leadership in the House has been wonderful. The very fact that we are getting things done on a regular basis and we don't find ourselves there, well, I can't speak for the Senate, we don't find ourselves there at 11, 12 o'clock at night like the Senate occasionally does. But that historically, that's what's been happening, but not this year.
I'm going to put a plug in for leadership in the House. Lane is in leadership, so I would just like to say I think partly.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was sitting there thinking it, and as memory serves, you're in leadership in the Senate as well. So maybe a plug for both of you.
I was happier to highlight Lane, but no, again, having those conversations and being intentional about working toward progress in what might be actually good policy instead of the. Social media is a double-edged sword, and it seems like what has happened is culturally we can't find a place, or it's difficult to find a place where you can actually have discussions where it looks like you're being civil. I sense and pick this up on in hearings where the camera's rolling. There's a lot more theater during those hearings than there is on the Senate floor. Actually, when we're able, it's all available, the audio is available, but the cameras are not rolling. And that gives us breathing room to go and actually talk to our colleagues who we might have a disagreement with, or even a colleague that is on the same political lines. Even you have a disagreement with them, you can go behind the scenes, step back at the end of the chamber, the back of the chamber, and say, look, here's a concern here, here, and here. I mean, I just had that happen a couple of days ago with one of my colleagues. Like, hey, what about this right here? And we were able to strip it out and move it forward. But if the cameras are rolling, it seems like culturally or in society, we can't get along, or that's a weakness, and the hope is that we can change that culture and actually
That's
make
a
progress.
very interesting point. Somebody once, when I first got up there, told me that the Senate was like a champagne brunch and the House was like a frat house kegger. But there are 5 times as many of us, and the cameras are rolling, and the opportunity to stand at the mic and create theater. Now, we're time limited, unlike the Senate, but 15 minutes can be a very long time when somebody's at the mic making the most of the opportunity.
Well, and you mentioned time. We're just about out of it. I want to have both of you back. We still have a couple of weeks left in the session. We've been talking about how the session has gone so far. I want to have you both back to kind of wrap up the session, talk about the good moments, the bad moments, and all of that in between. But again, Senator Carter, Representative Roberts, thank you both for going on the record with us today about the question that'll be on the ballot sometime later this year for Missouri voters regarding the income tax proposal.